over the future of a major federal consumer watchdog as an Obama-era appointee sues the Trump administration to stop the president from appointing his budget director, Mick Mulvaney, as the next head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith, and good morning to you.
Yeah, is it wearing off?
Yes.
The long weekend?
Oh, it was a lovely weekend.
It sure was.
But we're back.
Morning, Sandra. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning at home. The current deputy chairwoman claiming that she is the legal interim replacement, but the Justice Department argues the president has the ability to make his own appointments. Mick Mulvaney has been a long-time critic of the agency, arguing it is beyond control.
This is just, it's a wonderful example of how a bureaucracy will function if it has no accountability to anybody. It turns up being a joke, and that's what the CFPB really has been, in a sick, sad kind of way. There's very little that your elected members of government can do to help you, to protect you against, say, overreach or abuse by that institution.
Joining me now is Stephen Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard and a Fox News contributor. No accountability to anyone. So, Stephen, you're left wondering, should this bureau even exist?
Yeah, that's a real question. And one of the things that we learned from President Trump's tweets over the weekend was that he wants to reinvigorate the Bureau rather than shut it down, which I think some conservatives who were watching this fight as it's escalated were hoping that he would opt to just shut it down because it is so out of control. It is so unaccountable. It runs opposite of just about everything that the founders imagined when they set up the kind of government that we have here today in Washington.
So President Trump tweeted this. He said the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, has been a total disaster as run by the previous administration's pick. Financial institutions have been devastated and unable to properly serve the public. We will bring it back to life. Stephen, what is the aim of this agency? What is it supposed to be doing? Obviously protecting the consumer, but what is it actually doing?
Yeah, well, protecting the consumer, but it has this broad mandate to end, quote, unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices, which of course can mean anything to anybody, and it doesn't have to really respond to anybody. It's not accountable to Congress. It has tenuous ties to the executive branch. It was set up as this independent agency, but of course what you might think is unfair and what a small business owner in Wisconsin might think is unfair is very different in all likelihood than what Elizabeth Warren would think is unfair.
So who's for it? I mean, I know you're going to tell me Elizabeth Warren is obviously for it. Tom Cotton says it's a rogue, unconstitutional agency. We know Republicans have long been critics of this. We know Wall Street doesn't like it. So who's actually for it?
Well, it is an institution, an agency that has been championed by, I would say, the far left of the Democratic Party. I mean, this is the kind of agency that the Ralph Naderites would have been enthusiastic about. And you've seen Elizabeth Warren, who obviously played an instrumental role in getting it started, championing everything that the CFPB does, and people like that, the Obama administration, eager to boost it and give it more power. I think that's been a problem. It's been something that's driven Republicans crazy, and not just conservatives, but I think centrist, moderate Republicans as well.
The Wall Street Journal editorial board highlights this very important concern in a piece this morning titled Richard Cordray's Political Stunt. Democrats pretend that the Consumer Protection Bureau is its own branch of government. In it, it says the episode shows that hostility to Mr. Trump is causing his opponents to violate the rule of law themselves. Democrats created an executive branch agency insulated from congressional appropriations and presidential control. And now they claim to be able to run it like a branch of government unto itself with a self-sustaining directorship. This is a perversion of constitutional government that the president is right to resist and the courts should reject. What happens next?
Yeah, I think they're exactly right. What happens next is, in all likelihood, a court battle, and potentially a very lengthy one. You had this lawsuit, as you mentioned earlier, but you had, very interestingly, the general counsel of the CFPB itself weigh in on the side of the Trump administration, say, in effect, the Vacancies Reform Act governs here. It takes precedence over the CFPB statute itself, and President Trump should be able to name the interim or acting director. And I think that is the broad view here. What's curious to me is these rule of law liberals who have been very quick to criticize Donald Trump and beat him up for not following, not adhering to the rule of law or saying things that are authoritarian seeming, are running to embrace the CFPB in these arguments, which I think contravene the rule of law pretty clearly if you look at the language.
Well, in that Wall Street Journal article, and Maria Bartiromo was on last hour saying that this really highlights one big thing, the hostility towards this president and trying to block anything he does. He does have the authority to name this person, obviously with Senate approval. So this is quite the battle brewing here. As I noted earlier, the employees of that bureau showing up this morning not quite sure who they work for.
Right. So
we'll continue to watch it. Stephen Hayes, thanks for coming on this morning. Good to see you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Watch the calendar. There is a packed agenda greeting President Trump and Congress as they return to work in Washington. Lawmakers have, well, a couple weeks now to plow through a massive to-do list topped by tax reform and averting a looming government shutdown. Doug McKelway live from the North Lawn there at the White House. And Doug, tax reform appears to be priority number one. Good morning.
It isn't, yeah, for sure, Bill. It is a priority number one here because it in large part affects virtually every American. But beyond that, the Republican-controlled House and Senate, as well as the Trump administration, need a big legislative victory. To date, there have been none for this administration. All that said, passage of tax reform is not at all assured at this point. At least 5 GOP senators have expressed some reservations. They include deficit hawk Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee and Jeff Flake of Arizona. Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Jerry Moran of Congress have reservations about the repeal of Obamacare's individual mandate. Should that be included in the tax bill? Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and Steve Daines of Montana are opposed to the bill's treatment of small businesses, or so-called pass-throughs. The White House, meanwhile, is launching a major charm offensive as Congress returns. It begins today at the White House as the president invites 5 GOP members of the Senate Finance Committee for lunch today. They are Senators Hatch, Toomey, Portman, Scott, and Cornyn. They'll be at lunch here today. It continues tomorrow as the president visits the Hill for more moral encouragement. Republicans largely, at least publicly, remain confident that passage is within reach.
I believe it will pass, Chris. I think that in the end, and we have members who are expressing what are legitimate concerns, who have ideas about how to make the bill stronger and better, and we're certainly open to those, and we're going to have an open process on the floor of the United States Senate where people can offer amendments. Those amendments can get debated and voted upon. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to change the bill in the direction that some of our senators want to see. But on the other hand, we need to get this accomplishment.
Undergirding that optimism is the fact that this is unlike Obamacare, the repeal of Obamacare. This is not taking something away, perceived something taking away from the American public. It's giving something new to the American public in the form of allowing them to spend more of their hard-earned money. And on that front, Republicans are united. Bill?
I mentioned the calendar, big obstacle, a week from Friday, December 8th. That's the deadline for funding the government. Where are we on that now?
That is indeed a very huge obstacle because look for Democrats when the time comes to include some form of action on deferred action for childhood arrivals to be included in any government funding bill. Republicans don't want that in a funding bill, but they also always appear to take the blame for government shutdowns, much like Lucy in the football. They don't want that to get in the way of priority number one, which is tax reform. Bill?
Thank you, Doug. Doug McKelway from the White House. 8 minutes past.
An alarming report about the FBI failing to warn high-level U.S. government officials after finding Russian hackers were targeting them for cyber espionage. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with new information on this. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Sandra. Good morning. A leading cybersecurity analyst tells Fox News this morning that there were warnings to law enforcement and the intelligence community as early as 2015 that approximately 2,300 officials and their spouses were targeted by the cyber espionage group known as Fancy Bear. This group is believed to be linked, even backed by Russian military intelligence. The coordinated attack, coming 1 year before the U.S. election, is seen by some analysts as helping to lay the groundwork for Russian interference during the campaign. The analyst said the compromise of Yahoo and Gmail accounts was then utilized to compromise the mobile phones of the the victims with the ability to tap into the microphone settings. In response to the AP investigation that alleged the Bureau did not alert the targets, a spokeswoman issued a statement to Fox News this morning that said the FBI routinely notifies individuals and organizations of potential threats, and they do so to the best of their ability, given the volume of the threat information. Sandra.
Catherine, what are we learning about the former National Security Advisor and his cooperation with the special counsel?
Well, a source close to the investigation confirms to Fox News that former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn's legal team has told the president's legal team that they can no longer share information about the probe. The source emphasized that Flynn's team contacted a number of parties, and the president's team was in no way singled out. On the Sunday talk shows, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs said of Flynn that he's not the man that he served with.
The Mike Flynn that I've seen since he made a decision to endorse very strongly and publicly President Trump.
Source close to the president's legal team believes Flynn's greatest exposure, if there is any, is on his work for Turkey, which was outside his role as a national security advisor. Sandra.
Catherine Herridge, thank you.
You're welcome.
Meanwhile, as we've been mentioning here, there is a big to-do list in Washington, but sexual harassment allegations continue to loom large. Senator Al Franken breaking his silence, apologizing for his actions, but he will not resign, he says. So what he's saying about all that this morning.
And meanwhile, on the House side, veteran Democrat John Conyers leaving his leadership post on the Judiciary Committee amid misconduct allegations. Congressman Ron DeSantis also sits on that committee and joins us live.
There are a lot of really troubling issues, both with the Conyers issue and then in the broader question of how are our tax dollars being used to cover for private misconduct of congressmen and staffers.
Lawmakers pushing for new legislation to force public disclosure of any payments made to settle sexual harassment claims against members of Congress and their staffs. This, as Michigan Democratic Congressman John Conyers announced this weekend, he is stepping away from his post as ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee while Congress investigates harassment claims against him. Joining us now, Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis, who's announced plans for his own bill that would bar private settlements using taxpayer money. Congressman, let us know first what it is, what kind of change are you trying to enact here?
Well, there's several things, Sandra. First is we need transparency in all these past settlements and the money that has been paid out. We know that there's been money paid out. We don't know for why. We don't know what members or staffers were offenders, and we have to know that. So I think the transparency part is very important. But I think going forward, if a member is committing harassment against somebody or a staffer is committing harassment against somebody, there is no way that the taxpayers of America should be funding that. That should be something that they are required to do individually. And I think past harassment settlements that have been paid from the Treasury, I think the members need to be forced to reimburse for those expenses.
I think most taxpayers listening right now would agree with that and are quite shocked by what we have learned through this process. Congresswoman Jackie Speier over the weekend talking about the process for reporting claims on Capitol Hill. She's charging that it's set up currently to protect the harasser. Listen to this.
I think it was a system set up in 1995 to protect the harasser. This is not a victim-friendly process. And one victim who I spoke with said, you know, the process was almost worse than harassment. So this is an absolutely priority that we must focus on in terms of fixing the system.
She actually went on to say that the harassment prevention training is one step, which we know is taking place on Capitol Hill. Paul Ryan is pushing for that. It's a good step, she said, but it's a small step. She says the whole system needs to have a comprehensive shift. Do you see that happening?
Well, I think clearly the system that was implemented in '95 is not serving the interest of people who have been harmed. And so I think it needs to be looked at. I think it needs to be overhauled. Clearly, when you have people put in this situation, I mean, Conyers, for example, allegedly fired a staff member because she would not succumb to his sexual advances. You know, that is a major example of abuse of power and harassment. And so if somebody who is the victim there, if they're going in a process that effectively re-victimizes them, that is just unacceptable. So I think the training is fine, but honestly, I think you need more structural changes.
Can I just get you to weigh in on John Conyers, obviously a colleague of yours, and both on the Judiciary Committee there for some time, and he's now under investigation. He's stepping aside, the top Democrat on that committee, which you both sat. He's still fiercely denying that he acted inappropriately in any of these cases.
Well, Sandra, that's why I think if you make all this public, now the payment in Conyers' case, didn't actually come from this slush fund. The payment came out of his office budget, and it was basically camouflaged as saying it was an employee expense when it was really a settlement to settle this case. So I think just unveil those statements and the documents, and then the American people will be able to see that. But clearly, if the allegations are true, I don't see how you could continue serving in the Congress having behaved the way that he's alleged to have behaved.
Meanwhile, there's this incredibly aggressive agenda right now that the Trump administration, Republicans have laid out for year-end. And you wonder, with this jam-packed agenda and with all that is happening with sexual harassment allegations on the Hill, whether or not taxes are going to actually get done.
Well, this is the make-or-break week over in the Senate, Sandra. As you know, the House, we've passed almost everything that we promised that we would pass, including the tax bill a week and a half ago. So the Senate has struggled to really do anything legislatively all year. I think this is make or break. If they're able to advance that bill out of the Senate this week, then I feel confident that we will have tax reform signed into law by the end of the year.
By the end of the year? Before Christmas, are we talking?
Oh, I think almost assuredly. If the Senate can pass it this week, these members are going to want to get it done. And so I think it'll be a very good sign. If they don't, then obviously it complicates. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but this is a very important week for taxpayers.
All right. Congressman Ron DeSantis, thanks for coming on this morning. Good to see you.
Thank you.
20 minutes past, and Hollywood heavyweight Susan Sarandon calling out Hillary Clinton. Why the actress says she believes the Democratic nominee was, quote, very dangerous. What's that all about? Plus, President Trump set for a big meeting with key Republican senators on tax reform. 4 weeks until Christmas, Congress got a lot of business to get done. We'll talk to the White House Legislative Director Mark Short about where we are on all of that next.
This affects everybody in America, so it should be right. It's not something that should be rushed, but it should be done. So we'll hopefully be able to get that through.
If you're this
It is not even an hour into trading on the first full trading day after the Thanksgiving holiday. And look at this, up 63 points. The Dow hitting a fresh record, 23,620. It is Cyber Monday, Bill. This is when everybody goes back to work and they shop online while they're working in some cases. And by the way, one of the big stocks that is up today, yeah, you probably guessed it. 1, 2, 3, Amazon. Amazon doing very well in this round.
Flying, hasn't it, right?
I can't imagine we're not going to support this at the end as a whole, and as the Senate. I'm still working on some specific parts of it, what I call a debt backstop, to be able to make sure that that's in place, and other aspects of it. But this will get done. We have got to get this done for the nation.
That is James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma. Earlier today, there was a big moment at the White House. President Trump meeting today with Senate Finance Committee members to see if they have the votes on tax reform. We're just under a month till Christmas, and remember, that's the deadline. The president wants to get it signed into law. With me now, White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short. Sir, thank you for your time, and thanks for coming back here. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me.
What is the biggest obstacle now?
Well, I think, honestly, Bill, where we are is that this week we'll have a Budget Committee vote, likely Tuesday, because this is being done in our Senate under budget reconciliation rules, and we should hopefully get a floor vote in the Senate by the end of the week. At this point, look, sausage making is never fun, but we feel like all senators are looking to try to get to yes on the Republican side. We're obviously disappointed that we don't have Democrat members looking to provide tax relief for middle-income families and for corporate relief so we can bring jobs back into this country. That's probably our biggest biggest obstacle.
Do you think you get any Democratic votes?
Well, Bill, we're still hopeful. I mean, at the end of the day, again, this tax package is focused on middle-income families. Those earning $70,000 roughly will get over $2,000 in tax relief in the Senate bill. Additionally, the corporate tax relief will help bring jobs back into America. So we would hope that many Democrat senators, particularly those in the upper Midwest that have had so many companies flee their states and move overseas, would want to be a part of this tax relief for their citizens.
Let me show our viewers, let's call it 6 senators to watch, okay? On screen, Collins, Corker, Flake, McCain, Murkowski, Johnson. I asked you what's the biggest obstacle. I didn't quite hear an answer there. Who is the biggest obstacle then on that list?
I honestly don't view that those members are obstacles. We've had conversations with pretty much each and every one of them throughout the Thanksgiving holidays. They have some policy concerns, but they're all looking to try to get to yes, as you heard Senator Lankford say before your intro. So I honestly believe the biggest obstacles have been on the Democrat side of the aisle, more so than the Republican side.
How are you going to satisfy, like Corker and Flake, they're really concerned with government spending. And that seems to be a conversation that we've lost now in government now.
Well, that's true, Bill, but keep in mind a couple of things. One is that this administration put forward a budget that balanced in 10 years. We're very sincere about understanding the spending problems that this nation faces, and we've tried to fix that. But there's no way that we can fund the things that this government needs unless we get growth. If we're growing at 1.8% as we did during the Obama years, we will never be able to fund the military needs that this country has. Therefore, we need to get this economy growing again. It's done 3% the last 2 quarters under President Trump, but we need to even do better than that, and we think we can with the right tax relief. So the way to actually get the deficits under control and pay for the things that we need is to get the economy growing again.
Can you tell our viewers now, has the bill changed from last week to this week?
So let's keep in mind a couple of things. In the House, bill has already passed. On the Senate Finance Committee, there continues to be negotiations, and you'll probably see a manager's amendment that comes forward at the end, and that's par for the course. And there'll be some minor changes likely there.
On that question, can you specifically say what is being debated now?
I think that Ron Johnson and Steve Daines have raised concerns about pass-throughs and being treated the same way that C Corps are. But let's keep in mind that for the concerns of small businesses, the National Federation of Independent Businesses has endorsed the Senate bill as it is because small businesses get over $400 billion in tax relief with the Senate bill currently. So there's some small tinkering going on.
Sorry, based on that answer, are you working to satisfy Senators Johnson and Daines?
Of course, we're working to satisfy all the members in the Senate so we can get the most yes votes as possible. But we feel very good about where we are in this process, and that the members are looking to give us a yes vote because they understand how important it is to get tax relief for middle-income families.
2 more questions. I hope you can hear me over the siren there. On the Obamacare repeal, has the White House dropped the push to have that in this legislation?
No, I don't think that we've dropped that, Bill. I think that, keep in mind that the individual mandate was one of the most insidious parts of Obamacare. And Justice Roberts eventually sided with the Obama administration arguments that the individual mandate is a tax. That was the case they made to the Supreme Court. It is appropriate to put it in tax reform. Over 80% of the families paying the individual mandate tax penalty earn less than $50,000. Those who are most impacted are middle-income families in this country. So it's important that we provide them with the tax relief that we've promised.
Remember the promise, too, though, repeal and replace.
Oh, well, sure. I think that the president still remains committed that we are anxious to repeal Obamacare, and we haven't given up on that, Bill.
Mark Short, thank you for your time. I hope you come back. I know there's a big meeting today, and the president goes to Capitol Hill tomorrow, so we're going to be watching this and see whether or not the success can bear out. Thank you, sir, for your time. You bet. Sandra.
Well, it could be a decision day for the illegal immigrant accused of murdering Kate Steinle. What we can expect in court today.
Also, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn cutting ties with President Trump's legal team. What is that all about? What the move could mean for Robert Mueller's investigation. The judge is on deck. Next.
Given the potential charges against Flynn, including false statements, his credibility is suspect. To put him on the witness stand against those charges, they're going to need some real corroborating evidence to support his testimony going forward if he agrees to cooperate.
10:33 here in New York City and California. Jury deliberations resuming in the Kate Steinle murder trial after the long holiday weekend. The jury got the case last Tuesday, and her death put San Francisco and its sanctuary city policy in the national spotlight. It's a refusal to allow city officials to cooperate with federal deportation efforts. The defendant, illegal Mexican immigrant Jose Zarate, has been deported 5 times before shooting and killing Steinle in what he says was an accident.
Syrian activists saying a Russian warplanes killed 25 civilians during airstrikes meant to take out a village held by ISIS. Connor Powell is following the story for us live in Jerusalem. Connor?
Yes, Sandra, as UN-backed peace talks are set to resume in Geneva this week, the violence and death toll in Syria really does continue to mount. With very little chance these talks lead to some significant progress, both ISIS militant and anti-government rebels have been targeted by Russia and the Assad regime in the past few days. Over the weekend, Russia launched airstrikes in the rebel-held Damascus suburb of Ghouta. At least 25 people were killed there, according to monitoring groups. Ghouta is one of the last few areas that is still under control by anti-Assad rebels. Now, across the country, Russian airstrikes killed more than 50 people in Deir ez-Zor province in eastern Syria on Sunday. The Russian Ministry of Defense did say its bombers were targeting ISIS militants in the area, but among the 53 dead were also 21 children. Now, Sandra, as I said, the talks are set to resume this week, but it really doesn't look like much is going to come out of it. Essentially, the Assad regime is unwilling to consider any type of talks that would remove Bashar al-Assad from power, while the opposition groups, which are fading in terms of their ability to do much negotiation because they're losing ground all over Syria, they are still insisting that Assad step down. That simply is something that Russia, Sandra, will not tolerate.
Connor Powell live in Jerusalem for us. Thank you.
Meanwhile, back here at home, some big news potentially over the holiday weekend. Lawyers for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn no longer sharing information with President Trump's legal team. So what does that mean, possibly? Judge Anna Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. And sir, nice to see you.
Good morning,
Hope
Bill.
you had a good Thanksgiving break.
I did. Back at you.
Good morning to you. Thank you. Now, it is not uncommon, you say, for lawyers to enter into a legal agreement. What does that do, or what does that mean?
Okay, so if the government is investigating a group of people that have a relationship with each other, either by family or by financial relationship, they will often enter into a joint defense agreement. That is a contract reduced to writing in which the lawyers are each one of the members of the group, and we know who's in the group. The President of the United States, his son Donald Jr., his son-in-law Jared Kushner, and until last week, his former National Security Advisor General Flynn. Those lawyers all agree. We will share all communications between the government and us with the rest of you. We will share with you whatever documents we give the government, whatever documents the government gives us. And we will not point fingers at anybody in the group, no matter what the government wants us to do. This makes it more difficult for the government to investigate because they're sort of confronting a wall where all the defendants are together. Last Wednesday evening, lawyers for General Flynn wrote to the lawyers for the others in the group, including the lawyers for the President of the United States, saying, we're no longer in the group. We are removing ourselves from this agreement. That tells those of us who watch these things they have either negotiated with Special Counsel Mueller, or they want to negotiate with Mueller because they have something of value for him, and he has something of value for them.
That would suggest that there's some sort of plea deal in the works.
For the general.
For General Flynn. I mean,
yes.
we don't know that, but we're guessing based on legal history that's what is happening.
Correct.
What does General Flynn that he could offer Robert Mueller?
It would have to be credible evidence, because there are questions about the general's credibility, because one of the charges against him, potential charges, he hasn't been charged with anything publicly yet, is lying to the FBI. So there have to be some credible evidence that is corroborated of some unlawful activity on the part of somebody else in the group, the President, Donald Jr., Jared Kushner, within the past 5 years. 5 years is the length of the statute of limitations. Now, normally, one testifies up, not down, meaning you give evidence about somebody north of you on the totem pole. There's only one person north of General Flynn, if you rank the hierarchy of these people that the special counsel's investigating. That's the president himself.
Characterize this. Is this a big move? Is this a big deal, or do you know?
I don't know, because I'm not privy to what the general and his lawyers and Bob Mueller and his lawyers are negotiating. But I think it's something the White House should be very concerned about, because the general was a confidant of Donald Trump going back to the summer of 2015 when he first began his run for the presidency. If the general is willing to offer something of value, he's exposed to decades in prison. If he were to be charged with all the crimes for which there is evidence and convicted of all those crimes, he would probably do almost anything to reduce that exposure. And that reduction would only come about if he could give Bob Mueller something in return for the reduction. What would he give him? Evidence of criminal behavior on the part of the president.
Does